The fish that killed a 5-year-old girl on Florida's Suwannee River has no teeth and cannot bite. It came out of the water at 8:47 in the evening on a Thursday in July 2015 near Fanning Springs, into a boat carrying a family that had used that river their whole lives. Jaylon Rippy died the next morning. Her mother and 9-year-old brother were flown to a hospital in Gainesville. But that animal is protected by federal law, and Florida's own wildlife agency will tell you biologists still wonder why it spends the energy to leave the water at all. Start with the record, because the rest of this leans on it. The account comes from a press release the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission put out the day after. A mother and her 2 children were in a boat on the Suwannee near Fanning Springs, in the flat green country of North Florida, where the river runs tea-colored under cypress. The children's father was at the wheel. The time was 8:47 in the evening. A sturgeon came out of the river and into the vessel. All 3 were airlifted to UF Health Shands Hospital in Gainesville. The 5-year-old died early the next morning of severe head trauma, according to the FWC officer who spoke for the agency's North Central region. Her brother left the hospital with a broken arm. Her mother left with facial injuries that were expected to need reconstructive surgery. The family was from Trenton, a town of about 2,000 people roughly 30 miles south of the river. Her funeral was held that Saturday morning. Her grandmother told a Jacksonville news crew that she wanted something done about the fish on the river, a no-wake zone, anything. And the agency confirmed the part that made this a national story for about 48 hours. It was the first fatality from a sturgeon strike ever recorded on the Suwannee River. Now hold that word first, because it tells you something about the 2 years before. The FWC keeps a year-by-year log of reported sturgeon strikes on the Suwannee, and it is public. In 2013, 0. In 2014, 0. Not a single reported strike across 2 full seasons. Then, 2015 arrives, and the log shows 3 reported strikes on the Suwannee, producing 1 fatality and 5 injuries, plus 2 more strikes over on the neighboring Santa Fe River that hurt 3 people. The FWC's own summary of that season counts 5 reportable accidents, 1 fatality, and 8 injuries on water that had been quiet for 2 years running. Run further back through that same log, and the pattern gets stranger, not clearer. 9 reported strikes in 2006, causing 11 injuries. 7 strikes in 2007. 3 in 2008, 2 in 2009, then nothing at all in 2010. 11 strikes in 2011, the most on the list. 2 in 2012. Then the 2 silent years, then the summer that killed a child. Those numbers do not climb or fall. They spike and vanish and spike again on the same river with the same fish in it. The agency's explanation for 2015 was water. The FWC regional commander in Lake City said that with the low water levels in the river system, the sturgeon were jumping much more frequently than in recent years. The Commission's public information coordinator gave the other half of it just as plainly. No jumping sightings were reported in 2013 or 2014 when the water was higher. Lower river, more visible fish, more collisions. That is a boating problem. And you can plan around a boating problem. The biology underneath it is the part nobody has closed. So, look at what actually came out of that river. The Gulf sturgeon is a subspecies of the Atlantic sturgeon, and the Suwannee holds the largest population of them in Florida. An adult reaches about 8 feet long and somewhere between 150 and 220 pounds. The largest one reported in recent decades was a 300-pound fish out of the Pearl River in Louisiana. Back in 1936, a 503-pound sturgeon that may have been this same subspecies was pulled from the mouth of the Mississippi. The body is the part that matters when one of them lands in a boat. A sturgeon's backbone is cartilage rather than bone, the same way a shark's is, and its head and back are covered in 5 rows of hard, bony plates called scutes. Those plates are why a strike does the damage it does. The mouth is a toothless tube on the underside of the snout that works like a vacuum, with 4 sensitive barbells hanging in front of it to feel for food on the bottom. It cannot bite you. It has never tried to. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission answers that question directly on its own website, and the answer is one flat word: no. Sturgeon do not attack boats. The comparison the agency uses is deer hit by cars. These are also long-lived animals, which matters more than it sounds. A Gulf sturgeon lives somewhere between 20 and 42 years. The oldest tagged and recaptured fish in the Suwannee was around 27 or 28. One caught in the river in the early 1970s was aged at 42. So a sturgeon jumping off Fanning Springs this July may well have been jumping off Fanning Springs when the boat ramp signs went up. It has made that same move, in that same stretch of water, more times than anyone has counted. And this is an old lineage on top of that. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission put sturgeon in the fossil record 225 million years ago, settling into roughly their current shape around the same time sharks did. The Rocky Mountains started rising something like 80 million years ago. This fish already looked the way it looks now, long before the Rockies existed. Before we go further, I want to know where you are. Which river, creek, or lake is closest to you right now, sitting where you're sitting? State and body of water. Drop it in the comments. I read them. And if the things moving under American water are your kind of story, subscribing is how you get the next one. Here's what makes the jump genuinely strange, and it has nothing to do with the boat. Gulf sturgeon are anadromous, meaning they run between saltwater and freshwater. They spend the winter feeding hard in the Gulf, eating shrimp, crabs, worms, and mollusks off the bottom, and they can add as much as 50% to their body weight doing it. Then, somewhere around March or April, they move up into the rivers. And once they're in fresh water, they stop eating. Completely. Not less, not occasionally. An adult Gulf sturgeon in the Suwannee does not feed from spring until it goes back down to the Gulf in the fall, and over that stretch, it can burn off up to 20% of its body weight. That is the window when they jump. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission's own material puts the jumping season at May through October, peaking from May into early August, and states outright that jumping has nothing to do with feeding, because the fish is not feeding. Which leaves you with a fish that can weigh 200 pounds, that is slowly starving by design, and that is spending energy throwing its entire body out of the water. The agency writes that line into its own public materials almost as an aside. Biologists wonder why the fish would use energy to jump out of the water. That is the actual question. Not whether it happens, and not whether it's dangerous. Why spend the fuel? There are 2 documented answers, and they point in completely different directions. The first one is AIR. A sturgeon carries a gas bladder, the organ most fish use to control how they float, and the sturgeon's version has to be filled from the surface. That is the whole problem in one sentence. Plenty of fish can pump gas into that organ straight from the blood and adjust their depth without ever going up. A sturgeon cannot. If it needs air in there, it has to physically travel to the top of the river and take a mouthful. And it needs air in there constantly, because the pressure keeps changing on it. A weather front moves through and the pressure at the bottom of the river shifts. The fish drops from a shallow run into a deep hole, and the gas already in the bladder compresses. Either way, the volume is wrong, and the animal is either sinking or floating when it wants to be doing neither. Go up, gulp, come back down, and you're neutral again, hanging in the water column without spending anything to stay there. Follow that all the way through, and it starts to explain the fast. Sturgeon in the Suwannee gather in deep holes in the riverbed, the places FWC calls holding areas, and those holes are chosen for water that moves slowly enough to sit in. Neutral buoyancy is what lets an 8-foot fish hover just off the bottom of one of them without swimming, without burning anything. For an animal that will not eat again until fall, holding still cheaply is how it gets through the summer at all. Under this explanation, the jump is not a display and not a message, it's maintenance. The fish is refilling the one system that lets it do nothing for 6 months. The second answer is sound. In 2002, a team led by a USGS biologist published a paper in the Journal of Applied Ichthyology, and they put a question mark in the title. Why do sturgeons jump? The work was done on the Suwannee, out of the USGS Florida Integrated Science Center in Gainesville. They tracked when the jumping happened at a known gathering site, and they recorded what it actually sounded like. What came back was that a sturgeon jump makes a distinctive noise, and that the noise is consistent with a signal. The hypothesis that came out of it is that jumping is how these fish hold a loose group together. That fits the animal better than it first sounds. Gulf sturgeon do not school. FWC describes them as congregating rather than schooling, behaving more like herd animals that gather loosely in the same stretch of water and drift in rough formation during the spring and fall runs. And the Suwannee is dark. It runs tannic and tea-stained off the Okefenokee swamp, and almost everything a sturgeon does down there happens on the bottom, in that brown water, or at night. You cannot see a herd mate in that. You can hear one, and sound carries in water far better than it carries in air. The retired USGS biologist who has spent decades on this, Ken Sulak, described it to a Florida public radio station in the plainest terms anyone has managed. The sounds alert other sturgeon to their whereabouts, like cows in the field mooing. And there's a detail that makes the signal idea hard to shake. Christian Ard, a wildlife photographer, spent a spring filming these fish on the Suwannee and documented the full sequence. Before it goes anywhere, the sturgeon makes 3 clicks by popping its tongue down from the roof of its mouth. Then a few thrusts of the tail, a heavy push of water, and it breaks the surface, twists in the air and flops back down. Then one more click. Clicks on either end of the jump. That is not what an animal that only needed a mouthful of air would necessarily bother to do. So, which is it? This is the point where I'd normally hand you the tidy answer, and I'm not going to, because the honest situation is more interesting than a resolution. Florida's Wildlife Agency states it as closed. Read the FWC page or its annual boating release, and the sentence is flat and confident. Scientists have determined that sturgeon jump to communicate with other sturgeon and to refill their swim bladder to maintain buoyancy. Both, at once, settled. Except the paper that produced half of that was published under a question mark, and years afterward researchers were still publishing work that framed sturgeon jumping as an ancient question needing new technology to address. Those two are also not the only ideas on the table. The literature has floated jumping as a way to shed parasites, as part of courtship signaling, and as something that helps a female release eggs at spawning. Those explanations get less attention now, and the buoyancy and communication pair has held up better than the rest. The others were never formally knocked down though. They just stopped being the ones that fit the timing and the sound. Part of why it stays open is that this animal is close to impossible to watch. Almost everything a Gulf sturgeon does in the river happens on the bottom, in dark water or after sundown. Anglers almost never catch the big ones, because the big ones are not eating. FWC says it outright on its own page, that except when they jump, sturgeon are rarely seen in the Suwannee at all. So the single moment a researcher can reliably watch is the exact moment being argued about. Everything on either side of that moment has to be inferred from a fish nobody can see. The two explanations are also answering different questions. One of them tells you what the jump does for the fish's body. The other tells you what it does for the group. Both can be true and still not tell you which one drives any particular jump, or why a starving animal does it 2 or 3 times a day in a bad year instead of once. Nobody has closed the cost. The state of Florida can tell you what happens when the fish leaves the water. It still cannot hand you a budget that explains why the fish can afford to. If that's the kind of question you want more of, that's the whole point of this channel, so subscribe. and I'll keep pulling them out of American water. Now, where this happens is not random, and that's where the 2015 timestamp gets uncomfortable. Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission publishes the specific stretches of the Suwannee where these fish gather. Above Jack's Sandbar, below Manatee Springs, between Fanning Springs and Usher Landing, below Old Town Trestle, below the confluence of the Santa Fe and the Suwannee, near Rock Bluff, below Anderson Springs. Those are the deep holes, and that is where the jumping concentrates, though the agency is careful to say a sturgeon can jump anywhere in the river. The agency is equally specific about time. Jumping runs May through October, and it happens most intensely at dawn and dusk, less often in the hours between. Put those two facts against the record from that Thursday. The strike happened near Fanning Springs, which sits inside one of the named holding stretches. It happened in July, in the peak of the season. And it happened at 8:47 in the evening. Sunset on that stretch of river that day was 8:35, which puts the strike about 12 minutes into the dusk window the agency names as one of the 2 daily peaks. Every variable the state publishes was lined up that night, and none of it was hidden. It was on a sign at the boat ramp. Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission has been posting "Be Aware" signs at Suwannee ramps since 2006. That should tell you what kind of risk this is. It was not a freak event in an unpredictable place. Every condition that made it possible had already been published by the state, and it still landed on a family who had no reason to think any of it applied to them. And the Suwannee is not the only river these fish are in. The 2015 case got covered as a Florida story, so this part mostly did not travel with it. Gulf sturgeon run up rivers across the northern Gulf Coast, and the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission lists them by name. The Apalachicola, the Choctawhatchee, the Yellow, the Blackwater, and the Escambia in the Florida Panhandle, the Pearl on the Mississippi and Louisiana line, the Pascagoula in Mississippi. They also turn up in the Santa Fe and the Alapaha, and they push a short way into the Withlacoochee where it feeds the Suwannee. The Suwannee holds the largest population by a wide margin, and it holds it for a specific reason. There are no dams on that river. Nothing blocks the run, so the fish can use the entire length of it, all the way up to spawning gravel more than 100 miles from the mouth. On other Gulf rivers, dams cut the sturgeon off from the upstream ground they need, which is a large part of why populations there sit in the hundreds or low thousands instead of the 10,000 the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission counts in the Suwannee. Fewer fish means fewer jumps, and fewer jumps means fewer strikes. It does not mean none. There was a reported strike on the Choctawhatchee in 2013 that injured someone. In a year, the Suwannee logged nothing at all. If you boat any of those rivers between spring and fall, you are on water with the same animal in it, doing the same unexplained thing in smaller numbers. And on the Suwannee, it's still happening. This spring, an exceptional drought dropped parts of the Suwannee to near record lows and cut the sturgeon off from their spawning grounds up around Ellaville, more than 100 miles upriver, where the Withlacoochee comes in. Fish that normally have the run of an undammed river got stuck. Sulak estimated that 100 to 200 sturgeon crowded into a piece of river smaller than a square mile, in water that was low and clear instead of the deep, dark holes they want. The jumping went up accordingly. A sturgeon's normal rate is roughly 1 jump every 2 or 3 days. ARD counted 2 or 3 sturgeon in the air every minute. Sulak also thinks as many as 15,000 of these fish now live in the Suwannee, up from a population that commercial fishing nearly erased in the last century for its eggs. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission's own published figure is about 10,000 adults coming into spawn. So that's more fish, in less water, jumping more often on the same river. Which brings you to the only thing the state can actually give you. FWC cannot tell you why the sturgeon jumps. So its annual release tells you what to do instead, and the advice has not changed in years. Go slow, because as the agency puts it, the force of the blow at 10 miles an hour is nothing like the force at 35. Keep 360-degree awareness. Watch and listen. Wear the life jacket. Keep everyone off the bow, because that's where people get hit. Report any collision to the Wildlife Alert Hotline, and leave the fish alone, because Gulf sturgeon are protected under state and federal law and cannot be harvested. Notice what's missing from that list. There is nothing on it about the animal's behavior, because there is nothing anyone can do about the animal's behavior. Every one of those instructions is aimed at the person in the boat. That's the part that should stay with you. A sturgeon is not hunting. It has no teeth, it isn't eating, it doesn't know your boat is there, and it will not change what it does because a family from Trenton was on the water at 8:47 on a Thursday. It's going to keep coming out of that river every summer for reasons the people who study it can describe 2 ways and still can't fully account for. The surface gives you nothing. The water looks exactly the same right up until 200 pounds of armored fish comes through it.